Should parents be pressurizing kids to live with them?
Why does your parent living somewhere else from you, why is that a sign of not loving them? Instilling in their children that once you get to a certain age, let me tell you, you're out because I need to live my life again. But what I fundamentally disagree with is when a parent, puts across parental guilt on their children. A child not wanting to live with their parents isn't a lack of love or empathy, it's just that child wants to be free.
Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
And my name's Taj.
On this week's episode, we have a familiar face on this week's episode. So we've got Amit Kalley, who is a co-founder of For Working Parents. You might remember Amit from a long time ago. It's been quite a while since we've spoken, hasn't it, Amit?
Yeah, I think over a year for sure, no?
I was going to say you were one of the first guest speakers. And at that point, we were talking about social media. So anyone interested in that, listen back to those and we'll put the links on all of the social media. So thanks for coming back. So obviously it wasn't too bad being a guinea pig. We're going to change tact slightly from our last podcast. And we've changed tact because I hadn't realised, like I said before we started recording, we forgot to tell Amit why he was coming on. And so this is going to be an ad hoc. I am going to grill Amit. I'm going to be really honest, but I want you to change my mind or it's going to work in the other way. So the topic this week is, should parents be pressurizing kids to live with them? Now, the reason I'm really interested in talking about this was because there was a social media post put out by yourself. And I was like, okay. And the general feel was we shouldn't be putting pressure on kids to live with us or us with our parents. And I was like, hold on, I'm not completely on board with this. So let's start off. Hi, Amit. Before we get to the grilling, let's be really nice.
I was already in there.
I am. How are you doing? Tell us what you've been up to since our last podcast first.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you. I'm doing well. So growing the brand, growing the business. So for working parents, it's all about supporting working parents in the workplace, really. So we do two things. We support organizations to be more inclusive for their parents. So we provide things like parental webinars. We provide one-to-one group coaching. We do a lot of storytelling, or I do a lot of storytelling. So a lot of the stuff I put on my social media is all about my story. And that's mainly based around two significant parts of my life. One is losing my mother to ovarian cancer. And the other is having a daughter during COVID who was born with 3 holes in her heart. So I go in and tell my story. And the whole reason for storytelling in the workplace is to create a more empathetic and human workplace, because we often find ourselves working with people that we don't know very much about. And when they go off at 3:00 every day, we think, well, who's that? Why is that lazy bugger, off every day at 3:00? But we don't necessarily know what that person's going through at home. So the idea of storytelling is, if we learn a bit more about our colleagues and learn a bit more about each other, we're more likely to be empathetic towards them and support them and help them and cover them when they need it. And likewise, and ourselves. And the other part that we do for working parents is the one-to-one coaching for parents who are struggling with basically all the aspects of 21st century parenting.
And there's a lot of stuff there. So you've been a busy guy since we last spoke.
Yes. Yeah. Quite busy. It's good because, organizations are sort of trusting us to come in and deliver some work for them and their working parents. And also individual parents are sort of, working with me on the basis of, some coaching around parenting. And it's really interesting because a lot of parents ask for coaching for their children, for their teenagers, because they think something's wrong with them. But what we try and do is shift that narrative. And often, yes, children misbehave, and yes, children do things wrong and get up to no good. But often the issue isn't the children. The issue is the way in which you're parenting them. So once I can change the narrative of actually it's the parents that need the coaching, then we get some great stuff happening, and parents really open their eyes to just changing strategies, changing tact, and dealing with a child that might be ADHD or on the spectrum or behaving poorly or rebelling, or indeed saying they don't want to live with them anymore, or whatever the topic might be.
Parenting generally has to change because times have changed. We can't parent like our own parents did, although this might be a topic, because we've got all this technology. We've got so many different variables now compared to in our day.
Let's bring in the topic then, because I really want to go for this topic because it's something that's come up on our podcast a number of times, and we've always pussyfooted around it, and it's like, okay, yeah, fine, okay, but let's go into this topic. Why did you put that post out? And I'm not having a go at you for putting the post out, because I think your posts are fantastic because they do get us thinking of the other side, the other person's perspective. And I was really interested in this post. So what was your message with this particular post?
The post is part of a wide range of posts that I put out on my TikTok. So on my TikTok, I've built these two sort of little characters, a father and a son who seem to conflict on so many issues, because the father is a kind of old school, obviously in my case, Punjabi parent, and the son is a kind of more, British, modernized, westernized kind of son, and they have different values. And it's really about, and what I try to do in those posts is, although there's an element of comedy to them, I try to raise awareness about topics that often 21st century parents find that they are in conflict with their children, because there are just different views. And that just happened to be one post of, all the posts that I put out. Sometimes some posts gain a lot of traction, lots of comments and lots of feedback. Other posts go by unnoticed, really. And this one, I didn't put it out to create controversy, although most of the posts that I put out do have an element of, oh, that's interesting, or I'm not sure I agree with that, or that's a different way of looking at things. This post was really just something that is quite stereotypical in Punjabi households, but generally in South Asian households, which is, to what extent do we remain in this view that our parents should live with us as they get older? And to what extent do we impart that view on our children, that actually as we get older, we expect our children to live with us? Certainly from a traditional point of view, our sons is where it sort of comes to, because we know that our daughter's going to get married, and traditionally they go off into another house and they have to live with their in-laws if their husband has that same view. So it was just a conversation around that. And obviously in that particular skit, the dad was sort of shocked that one of his friend's sons had decided to move out. And he was even more shocked when his son told him that actually one day, I'm off too. In your case, it's obviously opened up a bit of a debate around whether that is something that we should be promoting, not promoting, talking about, or whatever.
I mean, I think it's a fantastic conversation, because it's something we're all thinking about or have thought about. And I did read through a lot of the comments, and it very much was on, the comments were very much, we agree there shouldn't be any pressure put on kids. What's your opinion on that? Before we delve in.
This is going to be a very heated podcast.
It's not heated. We love Amit. I'm not going to be too horrible.
Of course we do.
No, I mean, look, I'm all for debate, because this is a cultural thing, isn't it? It's very much a cultural thing, and I think the important part of a debate is it's not about saying that there's a right answer or a wrong answer. My answer to that, and forgive me if this comes across as being a political answer, but my answer to your question would be, it's very much based on the context that you find yourself in. I think everybody's household is different, everybody's context is different, but most importantly, everybody's children are different. Some of us might be really comfortable living with our parents because we just feel and there's different reasons for it. Partly there's that idea of responsibility. We feel responsible to look after our parents as they get more elderly, and as perhaps they tend to struggle with, general things like mobility or whatever it might be. The other part might be that it's just what we're told to do. They lived with their parents, and we were raised by our grandparents in the same house, and therefore it's going to be the same with us. But I think as society sort of progresses and moves forward, and our children become more, I'll say, westernized, although this is becoming more and more common in India as well, and in South Asian countries, where young people are saying that actually they want to sort of have their own lives as they, become more professional or whatever. So I think here what we're finding is that children are being exposed to friendship groups and people from different cultures whose idea is, their view is very much, we can't wait until that day comes that we're free to move out of our house. So for many of those, it's 18. I'm done. Thank you very much. I'm in my own place. I need my own freedom. And so it's finding the right balance between, yes, I want my freedom and independence, and I want to be able to live my own life without my parents kind of nagging at me or telling me what to do, or still having that. Even though they say, we won't say anything, it's impossible for a parent not to tell their child what they think about something. Even if their child is 40 or 50 years old, the parent's always going to say, hold on a second, you're my son. Don't forget that. So I'm going to tell you how to do this.
Do you think that quite a lot of the South Asian community always think that the Western way is always the right way?
And we're not saying, I wouldn't be saying it's the wrong way either. I think your answer was very political. I loved how you did that. But that is the sort of tone from that post that I got. And it's not to have, I'm going to repeat this. I feel like I've repeated it 5 times. It's not to have a go at you about the post, but it's just the way we're thinking of, well, actually, our parents are a burden on us. And that was the sort of question I had. Why is it that we've now turned it that our parents are a burden? And is there not a certain part of empathy? And a lot of your posts are about empathy. So why is it that we're looking at our parents like burdens rather than saying, well, actually, I respect and love you. And if you are going through something, I'm very much willing to be there, just like you've been there for us.
Yeah, I mean, burden is a word that you've just used, not me. So just to make that,
that's fair enough.
But I understand that is a word that probably is associated with people who feel they can't be bothered to look after their parents anymore, or their parents are just a pain in the backside, too much hard work, I can't be, so the word burden I accept, does apply in many cases. I don't think there isn't a right way or a wrong way. And I think there are some families, and I speak to lots of families in our culture, and I interact with lots of followers who do send me private messages about topics like this one. And I think there are two groups. I think the Punjabi community and the Asian community has been divided into two groups. One group is very much absolutely no, we are Punjabis first. We are going to stick with our tradition. We're going to stick with our culture. That is the right way. Yes, we live in the UK. Yes, we benefit from all the wonderful things the UK provides us, but we also give much to the UK. And so it's an equilibrium that we've built, and we're going to stick to our values.
But do you not think it's not a cultural thing in that? I feel like Taj is going to be have to be that. Oh, hold on, I'm going to sort this conversation out. But do you not think it's not even the cultural? It's turned into, for me, I would have thought it's more the love and the empathy of, no, I wouldn't want you to be by yourself, rather than the cultural. Yes, the cultural thing is where it started. That is where I'd be like, well, no, they need our help.
Why does your parent living somewhere else from you, why is that a sign of not loving them? Why can't your parent live somewhere else from you, but that love is great? And in fact, in some cases, with some people that I've spoken to, where there is that separation, that love has actually grown stronger because you're not seeing each other on a daily basis. You're not treading on each other's toes, especially if you have similar personalities. So sometimes that distance creates a much stronger and better relationship. So I don't accept necessarily that, if we ask our parents to live separately to us, that's a sign of a lack of love or a lack of empathy. I think sometimes, depending on the circumstances, it can be the opposite. It can be the truest sign of love, that actually we need that space from each other. Then when we do meet up, we have a wonderful time reminiscing and talking about all the things that we have in common.
Why do you think the older generation and the community, if they hear, oh my God, a couple have moved out from the family home, why is it such a big, oh my God, why are you doing this? What's gone wrong? Let's hear the gossip.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think because we still have, that generation is still alive. That generation that moved here in the 60s and 70s, we think about our own parents, if we share the same kind of, immigration background. My parents moved here in the 70s. That generation is still very much alive. So they still bring with them, and they still have those traditional values that they grew up in back home, whether it was in India, East Africa, wherever it might have been. They still have those traditional values. And I think, sadly, as we begin losing that generation, it's our generation, and maybe those a bit older than us, that are sort of stepping in, that perhaps who are either born here or came here at a very young age, and all they know is the kind of British way of life. They're the ones that I think are finding it a bit easier, perhaps, to say, actually, you know what, there's nothing wrong with our parents living separately to us. And also instilling in their children that once you get to a certain age, let me tell you, you're out, because I need to live my life again. And that's not me showing you a lack of love. That's me telling you that I need my freedom. I need to spend time doing what I like. You need your freedom. You need to spend doing time what you like. As long as we are perhaps near each other, or as long as we have a continued relationship, as long as we see each other regularly, as long as I get to see my grandchildren, there's no reason why we need to live in the same house.
What's interesting is what you've said. It's not a case of if you're living far away, you don't love them. And perhaps the wording from my part was wrong. And I am in the same position where I don't live with my in-laws, for example. I don't live with my parents. I got married, and now we've moved out. It's been the last few years. And I do agree with what you've just said, Amit. It has helped that relationship, because that distance has, I think, helped. However, I do feel that if the parent, whoever that might be, says, well, actually, I'd want to live with one of my children, whoever that might be, that is a really important conversation, rather than saying to parents, well, actually, no, you shouldn't be pressurizing. Because now, from my part, I know what the expectations from the parents' point of view is, for example. And whether we decide yes or no to live with them, or whatever that situation turns to be, at least we've had that conversation. Do you feel that if we're sort of saying, no, we shouldn't be pressurizing kids, we're sort of shutting down the parents from having that conversation? Actually, we don't really know what our parents want. If it is the fact that they want us to live with that, and the decision does then rest on us, do you think we're shutting that down in our generation by saying don't pressurize kids?
I think, I'm a huge advocate for open communication. And, everything that I post about, everything that I talk about is all about nothing should be off the table. There should be no taboos in an Asian household, just because traditionally we don't talk about sex, for example. It was always awkward. That shouldn't be off the tables now, because more and more children are watching pornography at huge levels. And if we're not talking about those things, then we're not building good relationships.
Can I say, Amit, one thing, when we did the last podcast, that is completely what came out. And that's something I took away from that podcast, saying, well, actually, for us to make sure we know what kids are doing on social media, it is about communication. So I'm 100%, that is what I've learned from you. That I do agree with what you've said there.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we really do need to have conversations. So I don't have a problem with parents having conversations with their children about what their preferences are. For example, I would like, son, I would like it if we lived together for the rest of my life, basically. That would be appreciative. But what I fundamentally cannot accept and what I fundamentally disagree with is when a parent puts across parental guilt on their children. That actually, I raised you, I gave, your mother gave birth to you, we raised you, we brought you up in this world, we clothed you, we fed you, and all of those things. And in return, it's your responsibility to look after me. That's not how life works. I fundamentally reject that principle, because when you as an adult choose to have children, you know full well that your responsibility is to nurture those children, to grow those children, to allow those children to flourish. That's a choice that you make as a parent.
Do you think on that point that we are then raising our children slightly wrong, and where they are becoming less empathetic and worrying about their parents? And that, I know that's me putting words in your mouth slightly, but do you think that's an issue in how we're raising them, where they don't want to live with parents, or my kids might not want to live with me?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I don't agree that a child not wanting to live with their parents demonstrates a lack of empathy or a lack of love. So I think there's perhaps a disagreement on what that demonstrates. For me, a child not wanting to live with their parents isn't a lack of love or empathy. It's just that child wants to be free. And I think every adult, a fundamental right that every adult has is to be free and to live a life as they choose. When you're a child, you don't get to choose the life that you live. And the vast majority of us, I hope, have wonderful upbringings that we can talk about where our parents were really wonderful to us and really great to us. In the same way that we would want to be with our children. We'd want them to say that their upbringing was really brilliant and really lovely. But I don't agree that I should hold that over my children as they get older, that just because I gave you a great upbringing, it's now your responsibility to look after me. On the contrary, I have the view that I gave my children, I hope I'm giving my children a wonderful upbringing. That means that when you get older, I want you to see the world. I want you to be free. I want you to enjoy. I want you to do what brings joy to you. Just don't forget about me. Don't leave me on the lurch. Come and see me every now and then. Let me come and see you. I want to have great relationships with my grandchildren. Preferably we'd live in the same town. But if you decide to move to America or Australia, it's your life. I want you to live it. I don't, because I feel that you used the word burden earlier, where we see parents, being a bit of a burden on us. My big issue that I have is parents that guilt trip their children, because not all children, by the way, not all adults are strong enough to deal with that guilt. Some of us might turn around to our parents and say, you know what, you can guilt trip me all you like. I don't care. I'm not interested. I'm doing what I want to do. Other children, I say children, but they're adults, are not able to deal with that in the same way. So they take that guilt very negatively. It can create huge mental health issues. It can create huge issues in that relationship. But the parents are often blurred. They don't care, because as far as they're concerned, their son is living with them, their daughter is living with them, their grandchildren live with them. That's all they ultimately want. And of course, I'm talking about, that example is probably not the case. There are probably lots of coexisting households that exist wonderfully well, and there's no problems. As I mentioned at the very beginning, you've got to do what's right for you. But as a parent, yes, you can talk to your children about your desires of it'd be nice to live together, but that should also come with the second part of the conversation, which is, however, I'd want it to be your choice. If you don't want to do that, then that's up to you.
Do you think, as the generations are going by, we, being parents, don't share enough of our lives with our children? Whereas our parents were, okay, this happening to me, you'd go to appointments with them, you'd deal with, I don't know, the emotional roller coaster with them. But we protect our children too much. Do you think we're going now the other way, where we're like, no, we need to protect them. We need to almost bubble wrap them from everything. We don't want them to know that we're going through this, through that. Do you think there's a change in parenting? And do you think that's making our children softer?
I think there's two elements to that. So sorry, I've just written down the bubble wrap part, because I will come on to that. But the first part of that is, I think one of the reasons why we spent a lot of time going to appointments and taking our parents or grandparents and things was because of communication. We were raised here, and I remember I must have been about 8 or 9 years old, and I went with my buddy. I went with him to the local planning association to talk about building an extension in their house. What the hell does a 9-year-old know?
That's responsibility. You learned it early.
I didn't have a clue about Bill. I mean, the fact that he didn't take any of his 3 sons is probably telling as to why he chose to take me and not his 3
You're obviously the most intelligent, Amit.
what does a 9-year-old know about planning applications? But he took me because I was a communicator. So I would listen to this planning applicator, give me all this planning jargon, words that I didn't understand. I'd have to try and translate them into Punjabi then to my buddy and explain that, I go right duck and whatever, you know. And I don't think we need to do that anymore. The reason why perhaps we don't accompany our parents to appointments or we don't take them to places because that generation, I mean, my parents, my mum's not alive anymore, as I mentioned, but, my parents spoke fluent English because they came here when they were teenagers and they were able to pick up the language, and they came from East Africa. Well, my mum came from East Africa. They were able to pick up the language very easily. So I don't think we need to do that anymore.
But do you think that makes the child less responsible because they're not sharing? For example, when we get older, or it might not have communication problems, but we might have issues getting to an appointment. So when it gets to that point, they're like, oh God, here's a drag. My parent might have to take them to an appointment. Whereas if, I'm not saying we should do this, but if earlier on we had already started kind of getting them involved in our lives more, then it wouldn't have been such an issue.
Also, yes, although we laugh at the fact that you had to go to this planning meeting, I didn't even know planning meetings existed. But you, at 9 years old, knew that. Whether you knew what the jargon. I mean, to be fair, I could go to a planning meeting now and there'd be jargon that I didn't understand. But you still had to put yourself in that situation and learn that you were talking about a planning application about an extension.
Yeah, and I don't have an issue with it. I love my buddy very much. We had a wonderful relationship. There wasn't an issue with me going. But
is that what created the relationship? Because you were willing to do anything for your babaji, whereas there's that different.
Yeah, I don't know.
Now.
Potentially, I think now. Having said that, though, when I look at my dad and my children, they have a wonderful relationship. I mean, my children are much younger. They're 3 and 1. So there isn't really that dependence on them to go anywhere with them. But they build.
But they've only got 6 years before they're at planning.
Exactly. Yeah, I know my dad would rather take them than me to any meeting. That's for sure. But yeah, I guess I think that relationship can be built outside of this element of responsibility. I don't think, if we look at it objectively, if somebody was looking into that situation where a 9-year-old had to go with his grandfather to a planning meeting, I think somebody looking objectively would say that was wrong. It's wrong for an adult to take a child to a meeting and for a child to feel responsible.
But is that the Western way now? Is that the Western way of thinking that it was wrong?
Yeah, why is it wrong? That's interesting.
Because well, I don't necessarily think it was wrong. I'm just saying somebody objectively looking.
Yeah.
But just from my point of view, I think as a 9-year-old, I was put in a very awkward. I didn't know it was an awkward position, but looking back, I was put in an awkward position to try and communicate between two people on something that was very, very important and that was going to cost tens of thousands of pounds. I could have said something wrong. I could have done something wrong. I mean, it was,
that is actually, yeah, but you didn't realise that you had that responsibility because that was part of your growing up. And that's really brought up a really interesting part, just combining what you said, Taj. Are we then sort of taking away that resilience, the responsibility from kids to make that
resilience? That's the word, the resilience.
You've had to go to this planning application. You hadn't realised this was actually a very expensive conversation that you're going to have. But you still had that responsibility and you didn't realise. So it's added a part to your personality that perhaps the next generation wouldn't have to deal with. But is that
also choices. I mean, my daughter, she's got a phone now and she's constantly messaging me, for example, oh, I'm going to do this presentation. And I'm constantly reassuring her. Now, again, is that a step too far? Because we didn't do that with our parents, because in secondary school, we didn't have phones. So you just have to get on with it.
And we had to reassure our parents that we were. So it's the other way around. So we've become the parents for our parents and grandparents, and now we're making them. It's a really interesting transition, isn't it?
It is. I think one of the key issues is that there has simply been a generational change, and I don't know. I don't think we need to tie that into the box of just the Punjabi culture has changed or the Asian culture has changed. Yeah. Generally, technology has just changed the world. So everything has changed. And I think, when we become grandparents one day, hopefully, our children will have different battles with their children than we're currently having with our children, such as, AI and all of that kind of stuff that's now developing. So all of these things change generationally. So some of these things I think are ultimately unavoidable. Yes, I think there might be an issue around resilience with our children today. I think you mentioned you're reassuring your daughter on the phone. I think at some point you need to break free of that. You need to teach her the idea that she doesn't need to check in with you on everything. But at the same time, you're the responsible adult and you need to somehow break that mold that she needs to feel that she needs to text you all the time, and you need to constantly reassure her. When we grew up, we didn't have phones, did we? So it's a case of we were just trusted to get to school, get back home, and using the landline, you might phone your mum at work and say, I'm safely home or whatever. But that is, again, it's a generational change. And if you're deciding to give your child a phone, that's your decision as a parent, of course, depending on what age you feel is right for your child. Part of that comes with the idea that there's going to be this constant communication. We've also been through a global pandemic where children who were sort of in those 2 years, I think we're now beginning to see the impact that pandemic really did have on our children. And we've got to get them through that. We're the adults. And of course, the pandemic had an impact on many of us too. So I think trying to compare generations is like, trying to chalk and cheese. There's no point us talking about how it was when we were growing up, because there isn't much to compare compared to how children are growing up today. So if we can get through that hurdle, then we can start focusing on how we want this generation to grow up.
See, that's really interesting. I mean, the whole concept of this podcast is very much to say, well, yes, there was always a difference between us growing up in the West and those traditional sort of parts coming from the East, which obviously were from our parents and grandparents. And if we don't do that comparison, are we then saying, well, all these cultural things? And let's be clear. I think the nice thing with how you started this off is to say, look, everyone's situation is different. And we're all well aware of that. And I think that's a really important point. But then do you think we're now cutting off from the South Asian culture by not doing that comparison? Because essentially we are the last sort of link, not the last link per se, because our kids are still South Asians, but that link to that tradition. And not all traditions are bad. And then that goes into this conversation of whether we should be having that conversation with our parents about living with them or not.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I would leave that for the independent adults to decide what they feel is appropriate for their home. It's not for me to tell you how to run your home, and it's not for you to tell me how to run.
How am I going to do this, Amit? You need to tell me what I'm doing.
Exactly. I am quite cultural. There's lots of things about Punjabi and Sikh culture. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm necessarily religious. Let's separate those two things immediately. I don't run a religious home, but I do run a cultural home. And there's my children, for example, we only communicate with them in Punjabi. So my 3-year-old speaks really nice. It's a real proud parent moment that they speak Punjabi. A lot of people ask me, why do you bother? She lives in the UK. Grandparents are all dying. She's not going to need to learn Punjabi because everyone speaks English. But for me, it's important for her to understand any of our Punjabi. And if she did want to understand Sikh history, she'd need to know what words mean, because certain words aren't translatable. And we still have family in India. My in-laws live in Tanzania. My family, I've got lots of family in Tanzania. They speak Punjabi as their primary language. I want my daughter to be able to communicate, and my son to be able to communicate with them. So there are cultures, there are things that I think are culturally still relevant today. Having said that, there are also things that I think culturally are completely irrelevant today. But I have made the decision as to what I think is relevant and irrelevant for me. In the same, I would never tell anybody else what I think is. I might disagree with them. I might say, I think this is, I don't know why you're doing this. I don't understand why you're doing this. It's silly. But ultimately, how they manage their own house, how they manage their family affairs, and how they run their home, and what kind of home they run is totally up to them. The most important thing is to have a home filled with love. That's all you need. And love can come in all sorts of different colors, shapes, and sizes, and whatever. So, some cultures are important to me. Some cultures I think are totally and utterly redundant and are not important to me. That's just a decision that I've made for me and my immediate family.
So going back to this topic, so in regards to communication on this topic specifically, how should parents communicate this to their kids without that pressure? I think this in a practical way, because I do agree. I don't think there should be pressure, but I will be saying to my kids, you bloody well will be living. But how should that communication happen? Because I think it is important. No one knows what the other person's thinking. I mean, you didn't even know that you were coming on this podcast to talk about this. I don't know what I was thinking, but apparently not. So how, on a practical way, what should people be saying without adding that pressure and that guilt trip, I guess?
Well, if you want my honest, truthful opinion, I think you should be saying nothing about it, because it's not your place as a parent to talk to your children about what they do with their adult life, who they live with in their adult life, and where they live in their adult life. But I appreciate that's quite an extreme view, and I appreciate that that's not a view that a lot of people will share. But you asked me my personal view, and that is my personal view.
Yeah.
But I think for the majority of mainstream cultural households, I think as a parent, perhaps it's talking about your preferences, and it would be nice if we lived together as a family. I would like to spend time with my grandchildren. I'd like to have you living with us, but at the same time, I'm not going to put that pressure on you. And if you decide that your life is better lived elsewhere, then that's absolutely fine, as long as we maintain those relationships. If we keep that conversation a little bit sort of magnolia, I guess, you're not putting those great big feelings and those great big emotions into it, we're keeping it a big magnolia, and it's kind of like an option for the children. Go on.
Can I add something into that? Because I can see the magnolia. What if, scenario, a parent has a health issue, and it is, and we're well aware that you've been through quite a lot as well. What if it's a health issue that the parent's going through, and they need that help? Should they be communicating it to their child to say, look, this is what I'm going through, ... I mean, stick around because I need your help?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that all depends on the personality of that person, I think. And I'm just thinking of examples of my own. So we lost my nanny just last year. She was 95. She lived by herself. She was absolutely adamant. I mean, she had a full-time carer with her. My mussy was nearby, lots of support and all of that. But she was absolutely adamant that she was not going to be living with anybody. She wanted her independence. And she was, relatively fit towards the age. Obviously, mobility issues, but generally quite fit towards the end. And she made it very clear that she didn't want to live with anybody. But I can also think of other examples of people that I know in my family who, at the first sneeze, they want their son to come and wipe their nose for them because they're just, they're not capable of wiping their own nose. So I think that very much depends on the personality of that individual. But I worry about an individual, I mean, that's an extreme example, obviously, but I worry about an adult that feels that, if something should, if an illness should befall them, that their children need to drop everything to look after them. I accept that it would be good for that to happen. It's important. I'm just thinking about, with my mum, we did everything we could to help her and support her. So I'm not coming at this from a kind of radical, I've got lived experience in this.
Of course, and that's why I wanted to mention that, because
I'm not coming at this from radical approach. But I think it's all part of that communication again. If there's an understanding between parent and child that, look, no problem, you live by yourself, do whatever, whatever you need. But I'm getting older, and as you get older, you get more ill. And if something, something does come up, I'm not saying we've got to necessarily live together, but it would be nice to have you nearby so you can support me if you're around and you're available. And I think children, if that's instilled in them from a young age, they would have that sense of responsibility towards their parents to look after them. But it would be through compassion, through empathy, and through love. It wouldn't be because of societal pressures or because it's been forced upon them. It would be all for the right reasons.
Do you think in the South Asian community, the older generation, we see quite a lot of the older white generation going out there doing their own shopping, and you're like, wow, they look quite old, but they're still moving and going along doing their own stuff, even if it's at a slow pace. But with the South Asian community, they start leaning on their loved ones more, and you don't really see them going out shopping and stuff like that by themselves. Do you think that's because we, as the younger generation to them, let them lean on us so much?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that scenario, because I see whenever you go shopping, you always see the older generation. What I don't see so much is the older generation in the gym, and that I'm seeing a big shift in as well. So anything where the older and this is me, you can see where my point of view on this whole topic is. The older generation, when it's something to do with leisurely or hobbies, that's where they're taking a step back. But anywhere where there is responsibility, where they need to go shopping, they will go. So just a change of scenario in that situation.
I think that probably, again, depends on circumstances. If an elderly couple are very much independent and very much want to do their own shopping whilst they're still fit and mobile, we should actually encourage that, because it gets them out of the house, it gets them doing things. But at the same time, if one of your child lives nearby or indeed does live with you, then I think it makes perfect sense for the more fit, the more mobile person to go out and do that shopping. But again, we live in a generation now where you don't even step foot outside the house to do your shopping. Most of our shopping we do online shopping now.
Thank God.
It's so convenient and easy, isn't it? Yeah, I think it just comes down to that fundamental principle that, I cannot accept parents placing guilt upon, onto their children, because I don't think they understand that children are human beings and not everybody can handle that guilt properly. And if I'm going really radical, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, family and friends, I probably could name you 3 or 4 that live in joint families that are happy, truly, honestly happy. The majority of people that I know either don't live in joint families or they do, and there is an element of misery to that relationship. It might not be shown publicly. It might not be, because to everybody, you come and go together, you go in the same car together, you're happy, you're all of this. But in that household, there are elements of misery, because you've got, let's say, 4 individuals. Let's say you've got mum, dad, son, and daughter-in-law. It often happens, when daughter-in-law comes into the house, because daughter-in-law's got her own ideas about the kind, and quite rightly too, her own ideas about the kind of house that she wants to live in. And then son is torn between doing what mum is saying and what dad is saying, but also torn between doing what wife is saying. And often when they move out in a bit of it comes to a stage where there's no choice but to separate. But if that separation happened at the very beginning, your relationship probably would have been much better. Mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, sus-in-law, traditionally, they don't get on, right, in our culture, no matter how people try and portray it as smiley and lovely, traditionally and generally. Of course, I'm being general. There are many that get on very well. But generally speaking, there is that rivalry. There's that kind of, they don't get on because they're in each other's faces all the time, and they cook in different ways and they clean in different ways. And they want to...
This is another conversation. I'm not going to go down this conversation because I've got a lot of opinions on this one as well. And I've been really quiet because I was like, Amit, we've got him on as a guest, so I can't say too much. But the one thing I will pick up, and I love the way you put this, I don't think that it should be done from a pressurized responsibility standpoint, but it should be done out of an empathy and loving point of view. And that, I think, is really nice. And that's something I'll be taking away from this, because I think, going back to what we said earlier, I think it's then how we are bringing up our kids. They should feel that empathy and love to say, well, have that conversation at the very least.
And also, just to pick up, sorry to interrupt, but just something you've just said there that I want to pick up on, actually. This idea that, how we're bringing up our kids, because we still, as a culture, worry about what society says. So when your children live separately to you, you're judged as a failure as a parent because your children have decided to move on and live in a different house. And that needs to go. That idea that people judge you based on how your family... So what you'd rather do as a parent is keep your family together but live miserably in that house, just so everybody outside can see that your family are living together and you've done well.
Do you think it's about educating the elder generation as well? Because they've been through, our children are going to live with us. Because when they don't, it affects their mental health as well, because they're worried. We never talk about their mental health.
And should we take a bit of that as well? Because I'm like, surely we should care about their mental health as well. And that's responsibility on myself as a daughter-in-law and my husband, because obviously we actually had this conversation the other day because I knew we were recording this podcast. So he knew this conversation was coming. And the interesting thing that he said, obviously I talk at him way too much, he's actually changed his opinion. Because his opinion was exactly that. He wants to go and live in Spain and do his own thing. And I'm like, nope, the kids have to live with me. But obviously I'll follow him wherever he is because Spain's not a bad idea. He has changed his opinion of, if that day came where our in-laws did say they wanted to, I pretty much forced him to say no, we would do it.
What about your parents? What if something happened? What about your parents?
Well, it's interesting.
Would you live with your parents?
Well, that's a conversation, because this comes back to the traditional thing.
Why your in-laws? What's the precedence that your in-laws are more important than your parents?
Okay, so on this point, it is that whole son thing. My brother's living with them. Yes, that's the case. But had that not been the case, I think it would be a big possibility that I would. Because in the situation that they are in, I think they need my empathy and love, and say, actually, yeah, I would live with you too.
Do they get your empathy and love from where you're currently living?
Okay, so, and this is the interesting thing. I can give them all the love and empathy I want from a distance, but I can't help them in the way that they need help. And that is the truth. That is the truth. The stuff that they're having to deal with as parents at being 75, it breaks my heart that I'm not living with them to help them. So we can live from afar and we can love them and give them all the empathy and phone them every day, but it breaks my heart that I can't help them in the household. And that's the truth.
Yeah. I'm not advocating for a particular stance here. I'm not advocating that children should not live with their parents. If it works for you and your house, then fine. I'm just saying that choice should be the choice of the children, not the choice of the adult. It shouldn't be the parent saying that you have to live with me. It should be the choice of the child. And those conversations need to happen from that early age. So it's not a sit-down formal conversation. It's a general chat. These things are dropped in regularly. So you gauge the feelings of what people in the house are thinking. And ultimately, again, going back to that sort of guilt thing, it's not about guilt tripping. And going back to the example, I'm still, even though you're talking, I've still in my head been trying to think of households where they are truly happy living in a joint house, and I literally cannot think of very many.
I'm not happy cleaning the bathroom. Had I lived with my in-laws, I wouldn't have to worry about that, because she's fab with the cleaning and the cooking, and my kapare would be washed. So there is difficulties even with that. And I agree with what you're saying, Amit. It's not a case of that guilt trip, and I have changed on how I see it in regards to that. But I think we both still stick in the same stance we are in, which is really interesting. Sorry.
Going back to the question I asked, how do we educate the parents and get them to stop guilt tripping the children and letting them stop worrying about what the outside community are saying? Because to an extent, we worry about what the communities, our generation still worry about what the community say. I can say that because I remember someone came up to me from my generation and he goes, "Oh, what's the gossip? Why have you moved out from my mother, living with my mother-in-law?" And I thought, hold on. First of all, why are you asking that question? And second of all, why are you saying there's anything negative about moving out? To be honest, it was my mother-in-law's, she wanted us to move out because we were just so loud.
I had something similar. So after my little one was born, so we moved back in because I was just sleeping all the time. So it was just easier. And I was going there to eat the food because she's great at cooking. And then just after she was born, my in-laws were like, "So when you're going home?" I was like, "What? I want to stay." But okay, that's fine. So it's interesting. Although we've taken it on ourselves to say, yes, we've made that decision, sometimes the decision isn't ours either. So it is based on the household, which is interesting.
Of course. I mean, I think it's about changing cultural perceptions, and more and more of us are now sort of sticking two fingers up at society. And sticking two fingers up at nosy auntie who sort of want to know what's going on and have an opinion on everything. Because ultimately we've learned, certainly I think post-COVID as well, we've learned that what comes first is us and our families. And we must do everything to protect our family. I'm not saying parents aren't part of that. Our parents are sort of part of that family. But if living in a separate environment works for that family, and that's what you need to do. If it improves the relationship, that's what you need to do, because there is that pressure. There's a pressure on the parent generation, the older generation, that hi, your kids have moved out, what's going on, what a disgrace. And there's also pressure on the kids generation. How can you leave your parents like that? They're on their own, they're getting older. Don't you care about your parents? What kind of child are you? So there's that kind of, a lot of families stay together simply because they're worried and they can't handle the idea of what people will say. But once we can break through that, we've got to do what's right for us. Then we can be comfortable with the decision to either stay in the joint house and be happy, and that's what we've chosen, that's what we're happy with, or to leave that joint house, live in our own environment and say, I need to live my own life. I'm finding more and more parents, certainly dads, I guess, more than mums, because mums are obviously tend to be a bit more of that loving, kind of, dads are a bit more, I don't care. I've a lot more dads of that generation, of my dad's generation, are almost speaking of pride. Their sons have moved out. They're actually they're starting their own lives. They're doing their own thing. Some of them not even living in the same town as them because they're at the moment in their 60s. They're fully independent. Their bodily functions are still all very much there. That conversation might change when they hit their late 70s, 80s, when things, we talked about this earlier, when the whole kind of health issues come about. Yes, there might need to be some changes. Maybe they move nearer their children, or the children move nearer to them. But there might not ever be a need for them to share the same house again, because what we realize as we get older, as adults, we all have our own habits, and so many of our habits are negative habits. We all do things that are negative and annoying and irritating, but they work for us. And the only person that can ultimately put up with that irritating habit is the person that you marry, because you sort of learn to navigate each other's irritating habits. But I know that I would never be able to put up with my parents' habits in the same way that I can with my wife's. And she wouldn't be able to put up with my parents' habits in the same way that she can with me, because we can be direct with each other. We can say to her, stop doing that because you're bloody annoying me, or whatever. You might not have that same relationship with a parent, or that might turn into an argument. Well, what about when you did this? And what about when you do that? And when you leave this like that? And you think, well, you know what? How about I do what I want to do in my house and you do what you want to do in your house? We're both happy. You have your bad habits. I'll have my bad habits. When we meet up, we'll meet up for a drink or some food or whatever, and we'll not worry about those bad habits, and we'll just talk about good things.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Amit. It's always a pleasure. And I was really looking forward to this podcast because I think this is something that a lot of our households are, and a lot of people are having to question and navigate through. The listeners have had both sides. You can see where both sides are coming from, and there is love and respect on both sides. We all do need to make our own decisions in life, but listen to me. No, I'm joking. Thank you. And is there anything else that you want to finish off on for anyone that is questioning whether they should move out or stay in? What would you say to them?
Can I just finish up on something slightly different? But it is related to this. I'm just thinking about some of the social media posts that I put out with these kind of controversy. The idea is to generate controversy because social media,
and we love them.
Yeah,
Carry on.
to create debate, to encourage debate. I mean, my biggest supporters are mainly people from our community who resonate, who my posts resonate with, and they provide some really great feedback. But some of my biggest critics are also people from our community. And there are people that are kids, probably looking at their sort of profiles, 18, 19 years old, telling me that I'm a westernized loser, I'm too British, I'm a coconut, I've forgotten my culture,
Have you had those comments?
Oh yeah. Loads of those comments. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've learned a bit more. The more I'm posting on social media, I've learned more about what trolling is. I've had loads of anyone they comment to me about how I'm a coconut and how because these kind of views that I'm presenting might be seen as a Western view. So people are calling me a coconut. They don't know anything about me and my background.
I don't agree with the trolling, because one thing, as soon as I saw the post, yes, we've had this conversation. We know, we've worked a bit together in the past, but it's the fact that we can have this open discussion. And yes, we've ended up at the end of this podcast where, yes, we are still in the places, we still think the way we think. I've shifted my perspective. I don't know. I'm not going to ask you if you've shifted yours. I'm sure you have. It's about having that conversation, and trolling someone for their perspective. Not a fan of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the fun part that I'm learning, or the less fun part that I'm learning about building a social media presence, because you expose your views and you expose your thoughts, and not everybody agrees with them. But there's a way to have disagreements. You can have debates and all of that, like we've had today. But I think calling somebody a lapdog for the British or a coconut when they don't know anything about me and my actual cultural values and my background is upsetting. But you learn to just sort of shake it off and move on.
And on that, I mean, like I've said, this conversation, we've all got smiles on our faces, and we've got our own perspectives and opinions, and it is about opening that debate. So we will back you and say, no, that should not be happening.
It's about respect.
It's about respecting each other's opinions. So once again, thank you, Amit, for coming on. Always a pleasure, and we'll be working with Amit very soon on another project. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Brilliant. Thank you both.
That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.